I turned around slowly. My father stood in the doorway, his voice low but cold enough to snap the air in half. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I love hearing from you all. The attic was dim, but I could still see the silver frame in my hand. The photograph of a little girl in a blue dress, laughing between my parents. Her eyes looked exactly like mine. I thought you said we lost all our old photos in the fire, I said, breathless. He didn't move, just stared. And then, with a voice that didn't flinch, he said, "We did, except for that one, because she was the only one we couldn't let go of." My stomach twisted. She? His eyes flickered. And that's when he said it. "You were never the first, Rachel. We never loved you equally. You were always second. The illusion of belonging begins with how well you learn to play the part." Growing up, I always knew how to read a room before I entered it. At school, I was the quiet one, the one who never caused a fuss. At home, I tried to be sunshine, the kind of daughter who didn't need reminders to finish her homework or fold the laundry, the kind of daughter who could earn love by not needing too much of it. Our house sat on a crooked hill, the porch always slightly slanted like it had a secret it didn't want to share. It smelled of pine cleaner and lemon rinds, and the walls were painted in calming shades my mom called sophisticated neutrals. But underneath the symmetry of framed memories and pristine surfaces, I always felt like I was standing somewhere I had to earn the right to stay. My father, David, was a man of few words, fewer affections, and precision. He ironed even his weekend jeans. His love came in the form of instructions: how to change a tire, how to hold a knife properly, how to shut the door without slamming. I learned early that silence was his way of showing he trusted you to figure it out on your own. My mother, Lena, was warmer, but in the way a candle is warm if you never get too close. She asked about my day, but never listened past the first answer. She hugged me goodnight, but only if I remembered to go to her. Room first. There were no baby pictures of me in the house. When I asked about it once in 3rd grade, my mother smiled faintly and said, "We lost a lot of our things in the fire at our old place. It's a shame, really." I didn't push further. My father's silence behind her was enough of a warning. But there were pictures of the 3 of us. Vacations, birthdays, me in braces smiling stiffly between them. Except none before the age of 6. Our basement was organized to perfection, and the attic was supposedly off limits. Too unstable, Dad had once said, waving a hand like it was just a danger zone filled with mold and forgotten junk. Still, I tried to be enough. I brought home A's. I made their tea exactly how they liked it. I laughed at Dad's rare jokes and listened to Mom's stories about her old friends with wide eyes. But love? It always felt portioned. Like dinner on a plate, measured, uneven. It became easier to tell myself I was imagining things, that every family had its own way of loving, that maybe I was too sensitive, too observant for my own good, until the day I went looking for the Christmas lights in the attic and found something else, something older than joy and colder than truth. It began with a lie wrapped in tinsel. It was late November when Mom asked me to fetch the Christmas lights. "They should be in a plastic tub marked holiday, red lid, white tape," she said, waving vaguely toward the ceiling as she kneaded pie dough. I hesitated. I thought, the attic was, "Oh, just wear a mask. Your dad fixed the boards last year." So I went. That's how I ended up standing in that dust-choked attic, surrounded by forgotten boxes and the smell of old paper and damp insulation. The air was heavy, like it hadn't moved in decades. My phone flashlight cut through it in hazy cones. Found the red-lidded tub half buried beneath boxes labeled tax returns, Rachel's art, and oddly, Rebecca. That last one stopped me. I crouched down and brushed the dust off with my sleeve. The tape was yellowed, The handwriting unmistakably Dad's. Block letters, precise. Rebecca? I don't know what made me open it. Maybe the way it was hidden. Maybe the name. Maybe the part of me that had always suspected there was something I wasn't being told. Inside was a jumble of things that didn't make sense. A small stuffed fox, its fur worn down to the threads. A ballet slipper. Just one. A child's. Hairbrush with strands still tangled in it, and photos. Dozens of them. All of the same little girl. She was maybe 5 or 6. Same dark curls as mine. Same eyes, same dimples. In some photos, she was sitting in Mom's lap. In others, riding on Dad's shoulders. She looked radiant, unburdened, real. I stared for what felt like minutes before my breath caught in my throat, because in one photo, a family portrait, she was wearing my old blue dress, the one I always believed was a gift from Grandma, except it wasn't mine, not originally. I flipped the photo over. Faded ink spelled out 3 names: Lena, David, Rebecca, Summer, 2002. That was the year I was supposedly born, but I wasn't in that photo. Rebecca was. I heard a creak behind me. Dad stood at the top of the attic stairs, arms crossed, eyes locked on the photo in my hand. His voice was low and flat. That picture was never yours to find. That moment split my life in 2. Before Rebecca and after. The attic, the dust, the lies. They weren't the trigger. The trigger was her face in my dress, her life in my place. Some families don't shatter overnight. They fracture, slowly, and pretend they're whole. I was always told I was born on a rainy Tuesday. Mom would say it like a story she didn't quite remember, with lines too rehearsed to be true. You didn't cry much, just looked up at me like you were already tired of the world. She'd chuckle, stirring tea. But I never saw hospital bracelets, no baby books, no crib photos, just tales, stitched together like patchwork, full of gaps they thought I wouldn't notice. Growing up, I learned to adapt. I wasn't the kind of child people bragged about, but I wasn't a problem either. I was the space filler, the one who got thanked for not being dramatic, the one who blended into rooms so well you'd forget I was ever there. And then there was the garden. My father's garden was his cathedral. No one else was allowed to touch it, except on Sundays, when he let me water the petunias if I was careful not to overdo it. He taught me how to deadhead roses, how to cut basil at an angle, how to respect roots. I remember thinking maybe this is love. Quiet, instructional, conditional. But it wasn't until I was older that I realized how much more he smiled when he thought I wasn't looking, when he was staring at the photo in his study. A photo I'd never been allowed to touch. A photo that now I understood wasn't me. It was Rebecca. Rebecca, whose name was never spoken. Rebecca, who must have been before me. I started connecting dots I didn't want to see. The way Mom sometimes slipped up and called me Beck when she was half asleep. The time I found a birthday card from someone named Aunt Elise addressed to our brave little girl, always in our hearts. The way Dad flinched once when I asked if I'd ever had chicken pox, and said too quickly, "Of course you have, Rachel. You just forgot." But I didn't forget because I never had it, because I remembered everything, especially the way they looked at me, like I was someone they were still trying to believe in, like I was a picture that didn't quite match the frame. I used to think the silence in our house was just a symptom of aging parents and a studious daughter, but it was something else. It was grief. Old grief, undealt with, repackaged, and I had been the replacement, a stand-in, a substitute for someone whose memory still took up all the room. It explained everything. Why Dad never came to my school plays. Why Mom hugged me like it was an apology. Why they always kept me busy, piano lessons, swim team, debate club, but never showed up to watch. They were trying, but not for me. They were trying to love a ghost, and I had lived my whole life in the haunted house of their guilt. There's a kind of loneliness that only comes from being almost loved. The kind where affection brushes past you like a breeze you're not sure was ever really there. That's the loneliness I lived with. That's the loneliness named Rebecca. Grief leaves shadows, but lies, they leave outlines of people who were never supposed to exist. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my room, the photo of Rebecca clutched in one hand, her name echoing between my ribs like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. Was I adopted? The question sat on my tongue like a dare. I wanted to scream it, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed proof. I pulled out the one place I'd never been brave enough to look before, the locked filing drawer in Dad's home office. I knew where. He kept the key. Taped under the desk drawer, left-hand side. Precision, always. The lock clicked open like it had been waiting. Inside were manila folders, labeled, stacked, chronological. Then one. Rachel, 2003. But my birth certificate was dated March 2004. Confused, I opened the file. Inside, hospital discharge papers. But not mine. Rebecca's. Rebecca Jane Coleman, DOB, March 12, 2002. Died, March 2003. My breath caught. I blinked hard. Read it again. Died. She had died. A daughter buried in silence, a ghost never grieved properly. And then, adoption papers. My name, Rachel May Coleman. Finalized July 2004. No parent names listed on the initial birth record. I wasn't their biological daughter. I was the child they brought home after theirs was lost. A replacement. Not born to them, given to them. Placed in the crater Rebecca left behind. That's why there were no baby photos. That's why I had her dress. That's why I was never fully seen. Only measured against someone I never got to meet. Never got to be. The ache. I'd always felt. It had a name now. A timeline. A ghost that had been living in the walls of my life all along. Suddenly, all the fragments made sense. Mom crying quietly in the laundry room every March. Dad disappearing into the garage for hours without explanation. The tension when I'd ask about their life before me. They never meant to raise me in a lie. But they also never let me be real. They loved someone else while calling me by a borrowed name. And worst of all, they pretended not to. I stood up slowly, the folder still in my hands, and looked around. The office. Everything in its place. Books alphabetized, pens neatly lined. Except one thing. One frame. Face down. I picked it up. Rebecca again, her laugh frozen in time. But tucked behind the photo was a sticky note. Dad's handwriting. Don't let Rachel find this. Some truths don't explode. They unravel slowly, like stitches pulled from skin. I waited until breakfast. The sun spilled into the kitchen like nothing had happened. Mom sliced pears with careful hands. Dad read the paper, unmoved. The same routine, the same ritual, except I was no longer the same daughter. I placed the photo and the file on the table between their coffee mugs. Silence. Dad didn't look up. Mom froze, her knife halfway through a pear. I said it quietly, but firmly. Who was she? No response. I tried again. Rebecca. Who was she? Mom's face drained of color. She sat down slowly, staring at the photo like it had surfaced from a dream she'd been trying to forget. She was our daughter, she whispered. I am your daughter, I said. Aren't I? Dad folded the paper slowly as if preparing for war. His jaw twitched once. You are now. What does that mean? He finally looked at me, but not with softness, not with sorrow, with tiredness. You weren't supposed to find out. That's not an answer. I snapped. He inhaled deeply. Rebecca died, meningitis, overnight. We didn't have time to say goodbye. Lena, she broke. I couldn't fix it. He paused. And then the agency called. They said there was a child who'd been abandoned at a hospital. No name, no family, just a quiet baby girl who barely cried. My heart was racing. You thought you could just replace her? I said. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We weren't replacing her. We were surviving. But I was never her, I whispered. That's why it never worked. Dad's words sliced sharper than any truth. That's why what never worked? You, fitting in. No matter how much we tried to love you, it was like your presence reminded us of her absence. It wasn't your fault. It just was. Mom reached for my hand, trembling. We tried. God, we tried. But grief twists everything. It stains the love that comes after. I pulled my hand back. You should have told me. Instead, you made me feel like I was wrong, like I was always lacking. Dad didn't flinch. Would it have changed anything? Yes, I said. It would have made everything make sense. He stood up, scraping, his chair back. I never asked to be born, I continued, voice rising. But you chose me. And then you punished me for not being her. Mom sobbed softly. We just didn't know how to start over. Then you shouldn't have dragged someone else into the rubble. Dad turned his back. Some people are meant to fill spaces, he said quietly, not become them. And just like that, I knew. He didn't regret what he'd done. He only regretted that I found out. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's choosing not to repeat the lie. I left the house. That same morning, no slammed doors, no screaming match, just the sound of my suitcase wheels rolling over the cold hardwood floor. Mom cried, trailing behind me, begging in half-broken whispers. Rachel, please. We didn't mean to ruin things. You were never second. You were different. That word, different, burned more than second. I wasn't asking to be first, I said, stepping out the front door. I was asking to be real. The morning air hit sharp. I walked until the house disappeared behind trees and silence. Until it felt like I existed again. Not as a shadow, not as a replacement, but as someone with her own name. I didn't have a plan. I just had a backpack, a few $100s, and a journal where I'd written down every question I was never allowed to ask. Who was my birth mother? Why was I abandoned? Did someone once love me? Not because of grief, but in spite of it? I checked into a small motel by the edge of town and called the number on the adoption file. It was a social services number, long disconnected. But inside the folder, I found something else. A crumpled document I hadn't seen before. It had a handwritten note. Infant found at St. Clair's ER, March 2004. No identifying markers. Possible match to Jane Doe, case number 472. Jane Doe. I was a ghost in the system before I became a ghost in their family. But now, I wanted to be real. I called St. Clair's. The receptionist said their records didn't go back that far, but offered to transfer me to an archivist. I left a voicemail. That was 2 weeks ago. In that time, I started working part-time at a diner. Rented a room above a bookstore. It's quiet here. No one expects me to be anyone. They just see me. Tired eyes, too much coffee, always reading. Something thick and sad. One evening, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was the photograph of Rebecca, the same one I'd found in the attic, but this time folded around something. A note. From my father. I don't know how to love you the way you deserve, but I hope you find someone who can. And taped to the back? My own baby photo. It was blurry. Hospital lighting. A red tag around my ankle. But it was mine. Proof. Of existence. Of truth. Of a start that didn't require anyone else's ending. I stared at that photo for hours, not because it hurt, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at someone else's reflection. I was looking at myself. Unborrowed. The deepest betrayal is not being lied to. It's being loved conditionally, in the shape of someone else. I still carry her name in my story, not Rebecca's, but mine. Rachel. And I no longer whisper it like it doesn't belong to me. Some days, I pass little girls on sidewalks wearing blue dresses and wonder if they'll grow up knowing exactly who they are. I hope they do. I hope their parents love them without ghosts in their eyes. I hope they are not held against the memory of someone else. I hope they are not loved with grief's apology stitched into every hug, because love should be clean, messy, but clean, honest. Not a performance, not a wound being rebandaged with someone else's name. I used to think I was the broken one, the extra piece in a puzzle that never quite fit. But now I know. I was whole all along. I was just placed in the wrong picture. I don't hate them, not even him, because hate is still a form of attachment, and I've let go. I may never find the woman who birthed me. I may never learn the full truth of who abandoned me or why, but I've found something else, something more permanent, myself. And in that, there's peace. There's power in choosing to walk away, not in anger, but in clarity. I am not her. I never was, and I am not what was left behind. I am what survived the forgetting. Was it betrayal? Or just how love looks in their language? Maybe both. Maybe neither. But I no longer need their language to speak my truth. I have my own. And it finally sounds like me.